in the podcast called Labor Matters, where I address trending issues in employment law, particularly within the context of Barbados' labor laws. I'm Michelle Russell, attorney at law, and I have a passion for employment law and labor matters. I am also a columnist for the Nation newspaper, where I write a weekly column in the Sunday Sun. So if you wish to know more about your labor rights, don't forget to get your copy of the Sunday Sun. Now, on today's episode, we are going to be discussing a topic that is very dear to me, and that is the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, once you live in the Caribbean, you understand that certain behaviors and statements are commonplace, like walking down the road and somebody saying, "Psst, my sexy friend," and we don't even necessarily think too much of it. But in 2017, the Parliament passed the Employment Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act 2017, and this act actually provided protections against sexual harassment within the context of the workplace. So today we're going to look at it in the context of what exactly is sexual harassment. So if I am at work and I say to a colleague, "Hey, you look pretty nice today," is that sexual harassment? Or does it have to have a sexually suggestive component? Like, do I have to say, "Psst, hey sexy"? Or do I have to say, "Oh, your bumper looking pretty good in that skirt today"? Or is it sexual harassment if I just have a screensaver on my computer of, let's say, a half-naked man or a half-naked woman, but it's on my personal computer? What if I walk around the office singing songs that we hear on the radio all the time, like, "She says she wants a big dangly"? Is that sexual harassment? And can sexual harassment be committed by both sexes, or is it only sexual harassment if the man does it to the woman? Can a man make a complaint of sexual harassment against a woman? More so, can you make a complaint of sexual harassment from somebody of the same sex? And what of workplace chat groups where you are posting random photos, quotes, and videos that might be popular on social media? Suppose the chat group is with your work colleagues. Will it be sexual harassment if you're posting certain material in that chat group? Today we are going to explore that by looking at the definition of sexual harassment, which we find in the legislation, particularly in Section 3. But let us start first by having a general overview of what the legislation is, what it does or aims to do. Now, the legislation which came in, it was passed at the end of 2017, and it's called the Employment Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. So that if you want to get a copy, you can go on the Ministry of Labor's website. You should find it there. You might be able to find it on Parliament's website as well. Employment Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. Now, the aim of the legislation is to prevent or limit the occurrence of sexually offensive interactions in the workplace between co-workers, between an employer and employees, and between employees and clients. Now, this is important because the legislation does not only protect co-workers from sexual harassment between each other, but it protects you as an employee from being sexually harassed by customers and clients of the employer. Now, this will become particularly important for those in front-facing professions, where every day you have to deal with the public and somebody has something to say to you, or they try to make certain gestures or even physical interactions that might be unwelcome. So that the legislation aims to protect employees from sexual harassment from clients and or customers of the business. It also provides protection for both men and women, so it's gender neutral. Any person can make a claim for sexual harassment, and it provides consequences for those who engage in conduct that constitutes sexual harassment. And finally, it establishes a procedure to make complaints for sexual harassment where either the complaint that was made internally at work didn't produce a result you wanted, or you want to at the very least appeal that complaint. Now, who does the act apply to? What does it cover? It is very, very important to note that the legislation only applies to sexual harassment within the workplace. It does not cover sexual harassment on the street side or any other place. However, The legislation gives a very wide definition to the term workplace so that you can find that sexually offensive interactions in other places outside of the building in which you work can be covered by the legislation. And that is because it defines workplace as including any location where persons work. Any location where persons work, and it includes any location or place where the employee is required to conduct the business of the employer, or any location or place where the employer sends the employee for training or for attending a conference. So this means that if you work in construction, every time you change a job site, that is your workplace. So any sexually offensive interactions that happen on those job sites is sexual harassment. If you are sent overseas for training or to a conference, it would still constitute your workplace because the Act gives the definition of workplace as covering being sent for training and conferences. And it says any place that you may be doing the business of the employer. So even if you go on a work lunch with a client, that would still fall within the definition of workplace, so that if there is something sexually offensive, it may be covered by the Act and you could make a complaint for sexual harassment. So that's one of the positives in the legislation and the wide definition given to workplace. So you don't have to worry that it's only if your co-worker or boss or a client harasses you within the building it would constitute sexual harassment. But what is important, it must be at a location where you're carrying out the business of the employer. So for instance, if you go to a work lunch, as I mentioned before, and a work lunch with a client or fellow colleagues, and during that time there's an interaction that falls within the definition of sexual harassment, then you could make a claim. But if you are at the workplace Christmas party, the same thing won't apply, because the definition of workplace is that you're carrying out the business of the employer. And being at a workplace Christmas party is not you carrying out the business of the employer, so that if something sexually offensive occurred at that event, you wouldn't necessarily be able to say it's covered by the Act, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to make a complaint. So too, if you and a bunch of co-workers decide to go for drinks after work, and while you're at drinks something sexually offensive occurs, it probably would not be covered by the Act, because at the time you were not carrying out the business of the employer. So the test is, at the time that the interaction or offensive action occurred, were you carrying out the business of the employer? And if you answer in the affirmative, then it is more likely covered by the legislation. It is also important to note that the Act covers full and part-time employees. So you don't have to worry that because you're only part-time you can't make a complaint. No, it covers you as well. It covers persons on probation, so you don't have to wait till you successfully complete probation to make a complaint. It covers those paid by commission and apprentices, but it does not cover independent contractors. So if you are perhaps a consultant or if you do job work, the legislation does not cover you. You have to be some kind of an employee. What is also important is that it covers sexual harassment even between same sex. So it is gender neutral. The sexual harassment can be done by a man, the sexual harassment can be done by a woman, and the sexual harassment can be done between same sexes. Alright, so what is sexual harassment? Now the definition of sexual harassment is found in section 3 of the Act. And it is a very wide definition, so that you will be surprised at how many things are covered by the legislation and how many things can constitute sexual harassment. It's way wider than most expected, and comparatively it is wider than some of our sister legislation, say for instance in Dominica, in Guyana, etc. So I'm going to break it down for you. The first part of the definition says sexual harassment is the use of sexually suggestive words, comments, jokes, gestures, or actions that annoy, alarm, or abuse a person. Now notice it said sexually suggestive. So it doesn't have to be overt, She said she wants a big dangly. It don't have to be overt. I don't have to say, hey you Randy, I think you're sexy and we should have sex. No. It doesn't have to be that. It is enough that it's sexually suggestive. And it doesn't have to be a statement. It can be a comment. And sometimes a comment is about someone as opposed to directed to her. I once heard of this thing where there were some co-workers sitting down doing this game called Who Would You Sleep With? And they were naming people in the office they would more likely sleep with or more likely not sleep with. That would fall under sexually suggestive comment, because it's not necessarily directed at the person, but it's certainly about the person. So a sexually suggestive comment, words, jokes. You know we love to run with little joke. You know we love to say something and say, boy, I was just joking, man. You know what I might say? You might tell me that you're in the gym. And I said to you, well, you know, I could give you some things to use those muscles for. And then you said, but Michelle, that's inappropriate. I said, nah, just joking. It's just a joke, man. Don't take offense. Covered by the legislation. Sexually suggestive jokes and gestures. Now, for the purpose of this video, right, I'm not going to do too many gestures because I think you know what we mean. I mean, as children, I don't know if it was done here, but certainly in primary school in Jamaica, they like to do this foolishness. You know, it could be any number of things that are gestures. You know, you go, and you go. That's a sexually suggestive gesture. Something would fall within the definition of Section 3 of the Act. But what's important is that the standard is that the sexually suggestive comment, word, gesture, joke, or action must annoy the person, must alarm the person, or must abuse them in some way. That's the standard. Annoyance is such a low standard. I can be in here and that AC is making a clicking sound and I am annoyed. It's such a very subjective standard because what might annoy me might not annoy you. And that's where the difficulty comes with sexual harassment. It is likely subjective, so that it doesn't matter what your intention was when you made the joke or the comment or the gesture. What matters is whether I was annoyed by it, whether I felt some sort of alarm by it, or whether I felt abused by it in some way. And actually the case law, we have a case coming out of Trinidad which actually says that the intention of the offending party is irrelevant. The only relevant consideration is that the actions of the offending party were voluntary and unwelcome by the complainant. So it can't be an accidental gesture. So that if I happen to be walking past you and I trip and my hand lands on your breast, that is not a voluntary action. So that even though it did on the face of it look like sexual harassment, the involuntary nature of the action would take it outside of the ambit of the legislation. But my intention in doing it is irrelevant so long as I did it on purpose or willingly or intentionally. Now the second part of the definition is the initiation of uninvited physical contact, sexual advances, or requests for sexual favors. So let me knock out the easy ones first. The initiation of uninvited sexual advances. Sexual advances are widespread. It could be a feel up, it could be a holding at the neck, pulling at the hair, or holding at the hand. A request for sexual favors that is uninvited is me saying to you, quid pro quo. You give me a little feel up and I give you a new chair. You want a promotion? Well, you know, I've been inviting you to dinner for a while. What are you going to do about it? Or, you know, I'm a woman, I have needs. You plan to satisfy it because then I could make your workplace conditions better. That's the initiation of physical contact. Well, in this case, initiation of uninvited requests for sexual favors. But the part of that definition that gives you pause is that it says the initiation of uninvited physical contact. So it's not just uninvited sexual advances, you know. Any form of uninvited physical contact can fall within the definition of the act. So that if I approach you and I touch your hand, it was uninvited and it's unwelcome, that can be sexual harassment. If I come up in your face and too close to you, or your lips are near to my neck, etc., and it's unwelcome, it can be sexual harassment. If I hug you, purely platonic hug, because remember the intention of the offending party is irrelevant, but it's an uninvited hug, an unwelcome hug. that can fall to be sexual harassment in the workplace. So I always caution co-workers, be careful with the touching, because you don't know what might be uninvited, and not everybody's confrontational, not everybody is vocal. So whereas I might say, yo, Mr. Man, what you do? Or I might say, yo, lady, too close. Not everybody will do that, and there are some people who will suffer in silence so that they take the hug, but they don't like to be touched or don't want to be touched by you. That can constitute sexual harassment. So it's better to err on the side of caution and limit physical contact, or at least make a request before you do it. So you say, do you mind if I hug you? Do you mind if I sit this close? Do you mind if I touch your mouse or your computer? That's the safe way to do it. Now the other aspect of the definition, which a lot of people are guilty of, especially in the Caribbean, is asking intrusive sexual questions of a person's private life. Asking intrusive questions of a person's private life. So some people are very open with talking about sex, you know. And you be in the lunchroom and somebody says, so wait, you only like missionary? What else you like? That is an intrusive question of somebody's private life. An intrusive question of a sexual nature of somebody's private life. Or what else those lips could do? That's none of your business. We have to be careful with the lunchroom talk. We have to be careful with the talk at the desk. We have to be careful with the questions we put in these chat groups. Because asking intrusive questions of a person's sexual life would fall as sexual harassment under the Act. Which leads on to the next part of the definition that says transmitting sexually offensive writing or material. Now transmitting covers the internet and social media. So you see those chat groups I talked about earlier, where all of you are colleagues and in the same department or just at the same office, want to have a nice good chat group and everybody run joke and everybody tag this and post this MV. You post anything, some party that happened in Trinidad, it could be Jamaica and the girl them a wine on them head top, etc., etc. It can fall to be sexual harassment so long as it's offensive, and the Act says further down in section 3 that it must be in circumstances where a reasonable person would consider the conduct offensive. So I might post a video where somebody is there just to remember the silhouette challenge on TikTok, and it was essentially somebody dancing and turning off the light, or just turning off the light and you just see the shape of the person. The question is that sexually suggestive? It could be. But the other part of the question is, would a reasonable person consider that conduct or a video of that kind of thing sexually offensive? And they might not. But if I am posting videos of a girl in a dance outfit half naked with pieces of her dropping out while she whining on the head top and God knows what else, a reasonable person might look at that video and say, you know what, yeah, all of us think this is slightly offensive though, this is a bit much. So you have to be careful what videos, photos, posts, etc. you transmit via social media, in your chat groups, to the WhatsApp chat, on your computers, in emails, etc. Because as long as they're sexually offensive writings or sexually offensive materials in circumstances that a reasonable person would consider the conduct offensive, then you can find yourself being subject to a claim for sexual harassment. And the last part of the definition for sexual harassment says, making sexually offensive telephone calls to a person or any other sexually suggestive conduct of an offensive nature in circumstances where a reasonable person would consider the conduct offensive. So making sexually offensive telephone calls. So like, hey, were you weary? That's sexually suggestive and definitely offensive. I don't think people do it so much, but back in the day, that was a big line. Hey, what you weary? Or what you doing? Or you want some company, you sound like you're home alone and need a little excitement. Don't use the telephone calls for that with your co-workers. Leave that to your friends. When it comes to your co-workers, talk about work. Leave it there. You can run joke, but it don't have to be a sexual joke. Lots of people like the double entendre, you know, the thing that have a double meaning. We hear it a lot in our calypso songs, whether it's social commentary calypso or whether it is the walk-up calypso, We hear enough double meaning kinds of stuff. I used to like to watch The Office with Steve Carell, and he liked to drop the comment of "that's what she said," ha ha ha, and I thought it was funny. But in the context of the workplace, it would be inappropriate because it may fall under the act. Now, what's important about sexual harassment is that the party to whom the comment is made, or the action is done, or the comment is made about, etc., or the words used, or the email sent and material sent, they must not want it. So if it's consensual, you are fine. If all of you run in joke of a sexual nature and everybody's fine with it, no problem. The problem is people change their minds. And that's a big risk to take among co-workers. It might be a case where you used to date or you used to have a thing going, and then it stops, and what was acceptable at one point is no longer acceptable. That is why it is better to err on the side of caution. Don't make the sexual joke then with your co-workers. Don't make it at work, in the chat groups, by emails, nothing. Don't flirt with your co-workers on the phone. Avoid physical contact with your co-workers unless you ask them first. Ask their permission. And if you're not sure about a video, a quote, a photo, etc., just don't send it. You have friends for that. Send it to your friend. It don't have to be to your co-workers. The last part of sexual harassment that I would like to mention is what's found in section 5 and 6 of the Act. And it essentially says that where an employer or supervisor promises workplace favors or workplace advancement in exchange for you granting him or her sexual favors, or you accepting or tolerating sexual advances, then that would be sexual harassment. But it goes a step further and says, suppose they made that request and said, boy, I will make your life good here at work if you grant me this sexual favor, or if you tolerate my sexual inappropriateness, whether it's flirting, etc. So if you tolerate it, you're gonna have a benefit. But you say no, you deny it. And as a result, someone else does it, and that person is getting workplace advancement and workplace favors, and you know for a fact that's as a result of granting the superior or granting the boss these sexual favors, then you can make a complaint to the labor office saying, I was denied this promotion because I did not grant the sexual favor or tolerate the sexual offensive behavior, but this person was promoted over me because they did it. So that's an interesting thing that the legislation does to protect people from being able to, I guess, use sexual advances and favors as a means of advancement or even entrapment. So I'm going to end today's episode at that, and next week we're going to look at what can you do if you are the victim of sexual harassment, or you think you're suffering sexual harassment, or if a complaint has been made against you. But in the meantime, avoid anything that can fall within the definition. It is always best when dealing with co-workers to keep it professional, no matter how tempted you are to do otherwise, because you don't want to find yourself subject to what could be a valid claim for sexual harassment in the workplace. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Labor Matters. Remember, knowledge is power, so that the more you know about your labor rights is the more empowered you are in your employment relationship. Take care until next time.